That was United with Look to You. You're on 94.9. It is 4:15, and it is that time of day for Creation Ministries International, and we have Dr. John with us this afternoon. Good afternoon, Dr. John.
Good afternoon, Mick.
Great to have you here, and of course, Dr. John, you have a website called creation.com where people can go and get all their questions answered. However, if people have questions, you'd love to answer them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not just my website, Mick, of course. It's
there's some other people involved too.
Yeah, a few other. Yeah. But yeah, look, we'd love people to send in the questions to us here, and we can answer them on air because, I mean, it's much more interesting than to send people to a website and say, use the search window for any questions. But if you've got them, then we can really address it on air, and it's good fun.
Absolutely. And chances are, if you have a question, there's probably a whole lot of other people that would like to hear the answer to that very same question. So if you do, please send them through to us. Our text line is 0401 949 949. That's right, let your thumbs do the walking. Just text us, send us an SMS, 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, we've had a pretty interesting last few weeks.
Oh, look, the last 3 weeks have been fantastic. I've been listening to Mark Harwood on this program for 3 weeks, and I'm sure everybody who's been listening to him has been really, really blessed. He's such a fantastic speaker, and he really knows what he's talking about. And I was just stoked last week with what he was talking about, and I know you were too, about how fine-tuned the solar system is.
I know, and look, he's one of those few people that would really know. Of course, he's a rocket scientist. He put our satellites into space.
That's right. He's the one who was responsible for the Optus satellites that are your GPS.
I probably wouldn't say their name right now, but yes, those
satellites.
I
know. Well, Optus when Optus was really Optus.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, but no, he does know what he's talking about. And as he said, people have been using computer modelling to just fiddle around with our solar system a bit and see what would happen if you moved Earth a little bit there, or the Moon a little bit there, or put another planet in there, or something like that. And every time they try and do something like that, the whole thing falls apart because it is so fine-tuned that everything just revolves around everything else. And it clearly is designed by a super intelligence, the God of the Bible.
When you consider the intelligence we have here on Earth, right, and we put up all these satellites, and every now and again a satellite, like, it drops out of orbit, or apparently it rises too high and it literally just flings itself out into space. Yet all the planets, they're just so perfectly lined up that it just keeps swinging in the right direction.
Yeah, no, it really is fantastic. But there's another thing that he talked about last week, only briefly, and it's something that has always intrigued me, and I've used this example a lot in my talks. One of the things that we know is that water is essential for life as we know it, and scientists astronomers get very, very excited when they detect the presence of water somewhere out there in space because they see, water means life. Yeah. Well, water doesn't quite mean life, but of course you can't have life without water. Yeah. And water happens to be super abundant here on Earth, but there doesn't seem to be a great deal of it out there in the universe. Plenty here. But of course, there is so much here that if all the, Mark mentioned this last week, if all the land masses were flattened out and the water was allowed to cover them, it would cover them to a depth of about 3,000 metres. So, it is a huge amount of water. And the question is, of course, how did it get here?
Yep.
Because if the Big Bang were true, then the Earth originally had to be this great big molten red hot, ball of whatever, and far too hot to have any liquid water on it.
Yeah.
So how did it get here? And the scientists were very excited a few years ago when they were able to land a spacecraft on an asteroid.
Yeah.
And what did they find? They found a bit of water on the asteroid.
Or ice, yeah.
So they thought, well, now we've got the answer. That's where all the water came from. The water must have come from asteroids crashing into Earth and bringing all the water with them.
Yeah.
But when you think of the amount of water we've got, you realise just how ridiculous that suggestion is.
It's a lot of asteroids.
Well, look, my first career, Mick, as you know, I had 20 years as a medical officer in the Navy.
Yes.
And so I spent a fair bit of time out there on the ocean.
Uh-huh.
And I've worked as a doctor on cruise ships. And I've done a fair bit of cruising. And look, a couple of years ago, I did a cruise with my wife to Canada.
Uh-huh.
And we went to New Zealand first, and then Tahiti, then Hawaii, and then on to Canada. And every morning, on the way to New Zealand, the captain would come on the blower and he'd say how, there's where we were and how deep the water was under the keel. And there was always about 2,000 metres or something like that,
Yep.
So pretty deep water all the way to New Zealand. But when you leave New Zealand, it's a 5-day cruise to Tahiti,
Yes.
and the ship's chugging along at about 18 knots. And it's 5 days to Tahiti, and you're still in the southern hemisphere.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's another 5 days to Hawaii.
Do you cross the Mariana Trench going over that way?
I don't think so, but I can't remember.
Yeah, it goes a lot deeper there. That's all I was going to say.
Yes, that's right. But I mean, the Pacific Ocean is just enormous.
Yeah.
Now, when you think of the photos that they had about that asteroid with the bit of water on it,
Yep.
it was mostly rock, but there was a bit of water in the form of ice.
Yeah.
Well, if asteroids brought all the water here, where's the rock?
Yeah, where's all the rock?
Where's all the rock? I mean, it is just so ridiculous. And of course, if that's not enough, they did an analysis of the water on the asteroid. And would you believe it was a little bit different from the water on Earth?
Mm.
Now, you might think, well, water's water. How could it be
I
different?
was thinking that.
Yeah. But you see, water is a compound of hydrogen and oxygen.
Uh-huh.
And hydrogen is the lightest and most basic element, one proton and one electron.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a couple of isotopes of hydrogen that have either a neutron or two neutrons. They're called deuterium and tritium. Mm. And they both combine with oxygen to form what they call heavy water.
Yes.
And it turned out that there was a lot more deuterium in the hydrogen on the asteroid. So it was a different composition to the water on Earth.
Mm.
It's only a very, very small thing. But that really, and I suppose you can't say that every asteroid would be the same, but the only one they've checked out, that's what it had.
Yeah.
So really, when you think about it, how ridiculous. And the Bible tells us that water's been here right from the very beginning.
Yes.
Now, what do you think what we observe on Earth is consistent with? Crashing asteroids or creation and the water being here right from the very beginning?
Well, it makes a lot more sense.
It does
it's
make
easier to believe that.
It does make a bit more sense. And you see, forgive the pun, but it blows the Big Bang out of the water as well. You see, the Big Bang becomes impossible.
Yep.
Because where did the water come from?
Yeah.
It couldn't have been there in the Big Bang situation. It could not have been there from the beginning. Yep. Because it would have all evaporated.
Yeah.
So there you go. The Bible is absolutely consistently true all the way through, and I think it's just fantastic that we can trust it so much. There is, and I'm going to talk a little bit later today actually about some of the things that don't appear in the Bible. Mark mentioned them last week. Oddball type statements that would not be true if they were there, but they're not there, and that's one of the things that makes it so good.
Yeah, I was watching the Starship, blast off into space on the weekend, and I thought about the billions of dollars they've spent trying to get this giant spaceship up there, and the number of times it's blown up, and I mean they still haven't got it to actually go around the world once yet. How hard it is for man just to get any type of body to, go round the Earth, and yet here's all these planets just so perfectly going around our sun, and they're all at different orbits, all at different spaces, and all you got to do is move one and the whole thing is knocked out of kilter. Yeah. It's that blew me away last week.
But look, Mick, I mean, a lot of the things that science has achieved in terms of space exploration really is fantastic. I mean, some of that landing a spacecraft on the asteroid, that was high tech stuff. Really, really good. But when you think about it, you see, of the billions and billions that are spent on space exploration, the main reason they're doing it really is to try and find life elsewhere, because they do not want to believe that the Earth might even be unique for life.
Yes, wow. You're on 94.9. We're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. If you have any questions for Dr. John, please send them through to our text line 0401 949 949. You're on 94.9. It is 22 minutes to 5. And I'm in the studio with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. We're here to answer your questions. If you have any, please send them through to our text line 0401 949 949. Now, we've talked a little bit about the conversations we've had over the last few weeks, and what I find intriguing, Dr. John, is that I get to interview you guys from Creation Ministries. Most of you are either doctors or you have PhDs or, all sorts of scientific letters before or after your name. So you're all in some ways scientists. Even as a doctor of medicine, you had to do a lot of science. You guys have been, I guess, embedded. A part of your life has been science. And yet you have a slightly broader view.
Yeah, well, it is interesting, isn't it, Mick? And they do say that not many leading scientists are Christians, and we've talked about that before, about how evolution permeates the scientific community so much. And anybody who gets to be a professor of physics or chemistry or whatever at a university is always going to be somebody who's gone through the system and, is thoroughly rooted and grounded in evolution. Mm-hmm. And they really, at its core, they can't see anything apart from quantum, quarks and electrons and protons and whatever. They cannot allow for anything that's not a material dimension. Length, breadth, width, space, time. That sort of thing. Mm-hmm. They can't allow for anything that's might be part of the spirit, because that brings God into it. Yeah, and I was going through a couple of some of my papers the other day, and I came across an article that I've actually used a bit in examples in my talks. Mm-hmm. And this is about a South African guy called Lawrence Anthony, mm-hmm. and he was a very, very well-known environmentalist and conservationist. Not a Christian as far as I know. He might have been, but this isn't a Christian story. Mm-hmm. But he was very famous because of a couple of books that he wrote. And one of them was a rescue that he did in the Baghdad Zoo. Now, Baghdad had the most famous zoo in the Middle East. But when the Americans invaded Iraq and to depose Saddam Hussein, things were pretty tight in Baghdad, and the animals in the zoo suffered terribly, and most of them died. And there were only about 30 odd of the big cats and bears left, and they were in a terrible emaciated condition. Anyway, Lawrence Anthony eventually got himself to Baghdad and rescued all the animals that were there. They scrounged around, got donkeys to feed the lots with, all that sort of stuff, and they saved the remaining animals in the Baghdad Zoo. And he wrote a book about it. It was a really great rescue mission. And he was also involved in the conservation of the northern white rhino and a lot of other things in Africa. But the most famous and notable effort was with elephants. And there was a herd of elephants that had broken out of wherever they weren't enclosed, but they'd got into an area that they weren't supposed to be in. And they were causing a lot of havoc and destruction and whatever. And a decision was made by the authorities to shoot them, get rid of these elephants. Anyway, Anthony wasn't having any of that, and he decided that he would protect these elephants, and he spent a lot of time with the herd, and got to know the elephants personally. I mean, he was always out there, and he became known as the Elephant Whisperer, and he wrote a book called The Elephant Whisperer on his experiences with these elephants, and they clearly knew him as a friend. He could go and walk amongst them and pat them and all of this sort of stuff. Anyway, at the age of 61, he had a heart attack and he died. This was in 2012. Right? 2 days after he died, several herd of elephants showed up at his house, right? They had walked for 2 days over 100 miles, right, to the house, spent another 2 days just milling around and trumpeting and whatever, not eating or whatever, and then just left.
Wow.
I mean, it's just the most amazing story. The elephants knew that he died.
Yeah.
Now, how do you explain that in terms of protons and neutrons and electrons?
Yeah, science can't explain that.
Science cannot explain that. And, I mean, it's not even a Christian story, you know. But the elephants knew that he had died. And they came to his house to pay their respects to their friend. You know, I mean, I can't even read the story without tears in my eyes, That is so fantastic. So there were a total of 31 elephants led by a couple of big matriarch females, 31
I've seen stories written where, elephants turn up and sort of pay their respects for other elephants and stuff in Africa, but that's the first time I've ever heard of that.
That's the story of him paying respects to a man.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Just fantastic. And the other thing that I wanted to mention today, I'm glad Mark brought it up last week. He mentioned how the Bible's a collection of books, right? Okay, and there's 66 books, 39 in the Old Testament, 27 in the New. And as the scoffers have often said, they're books just written by men. Well, yeah, they were written by men, but we believe that they were written by men under the guidance of the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
And as Mark mentioned last week, we've all got our own ideas about various things. And the Bible was written over a period of 1,500 years, from basically 1500 BC to the time of Jesus. So not a scientific time at all,
No.
And those people didn't know the sort of things that we know now, and they would have had all sorts of weird beliefs. You know, as Mark mentioned last week, the four elements were fire, earth, air, and water. You know,
Yes.
Nothing like what we know now as the chemical composition of various things. But interestingly enough, even though they were human, no weird ideas ever crept into the books. You know,
Yes.
they're just history books of God's interaction with his people and God's plan of salvation and all this sort of stuff. But none of the weird sort of human ideas that all the different authors must have had ever got into any of their stories.
Yeah.
And when you compare that with, as we all know, there are a lot of other religious books, I suppose you'd call them, part of what we now call the Apocrypha, books that were written in the Old Testament times and also in the early New Testament times by various people. But they never got it. Those books have got weird ideas in them, but they never got included in the canon of the Bible, which was sort of brought together probably in the first couple of centuries after Jesus. I mean, the books of the Old Testament are the ones that the Jews have always accepted, and the extra books, the apocryphal books, they never did accept.
Yep.
And there were apocryphal New Testament type books, but none of them were included. You know, so there was the wisdom of God operating in the minds of the people who even selected the New Testament books to include in the canon of the Bible, and they were not scientific people. They could easily have included writings that had all sorts of weird things in them, but they didn't. You know, and so we can confidently say that not only was the Bible written by men, but under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, but the selection of the books that form the Bible also came under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
You know, because it doesn't have stupid errors in it, like a lot of books that didn't make it do.
Yeah, and we see, I mean, as science sort of gets better, we have all these new discoveries, and they pretty much just point at a lot of things in the Bible, saying, "Hey, that was right. That was right.
That's right.
That was right."
That's right. And even the things that we don't have evidence for, every time there's a new discovery, you can see how consistent it is with what has been written in the Bible.
Yes.
You never find anything that, I won't use the word disproves, but is inconsistent with what the Bible has always said.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. Dr. John, it's 11 minutes to 5. We've come to the end of another week.
Yeah, fantastic. Believe it or not, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, and I believe you'll be back with us again next
I
week.
will be here next week, Mick. Yeah, I've got a couple of other things that I want to talk about next week, and so stay tuned, all our regular listeners. I hope next week will be exciting as well.
Absolutely, and if you have any questions for Dr. John, please send them through to our text line 0401 949 949.